Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this is continuing my series of my top 10 videos to wrap up the year 2023 and all things media. This time, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 books read. I'm not somebody that really keeps up on the newest books that are coming out, so I'm just looking at books that I read in the year 2023. And it was a bit of a challenge because I was really going strong at the very beginning of the year. And I fizzled out at a certain point. And I think it was because I started trying to just buy books to read that were cheap and probably weren't the things that were most interesting to me. And I started fizzled out my drive to read, and I also got really busy at work. It was hard to find time to sit down and read a book between all the other things that I do. And I tried to jumpstart things by listening to audiobooks, which took me more time to get through. And my goal for this year is to really make sure that I'm finding the time each day to at least listen to a chapter of a book. So I am going full-blown audiobook. I do have a couple physical books that I still need to read that I got as gifts, but most of these books that I'm going to be talking about are physical, but some of them were in that period where I was listening to books towards the end of the year. And in the end, I wound up reading 37 books in 2023, and you can check out my Goodreads if you want to see what I've been reading. And now I'm literally setting up my 2024 challenge and setting up for 36 books. Really trying to make sure that I'm keeping up with my reading. Because 2 years ago it was 12, then last year was 24, now it's 36. We shall see. And to get things started with my top 10 list is Artemis by Andy Weir, and this was one of the audiobooks that I listened to, and it was Rosario Dawson who read it, which was fantastic. Love Rosario Dawson. This is a sci-fi story out in space. It has a bit of heist elements. It has a bit of mystery elements, crime thriller elements. I'm a huge fan of The Martian, so I was interested to check out Artemis, and I enjoyed it a lot. There's definitely a lot of books that I read this year that were solid or kind of forgettable, but this one was still one that I enjoyed enough and liked the main central character, and there was enough mystery and intrigue to go along the way to keep me interested. I was reading through this book and had a really good fun time with it. Now my number 9 is The Keeper, and this is a graphic novel that I got at a black-owned bookstore that only highlighted black artists, and this is from Tananarive and Stephen Barnes, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. And this is an interesting story of a young black child who is going through an interesting situation. In her apartment, a young black girl finds herself trapped between desperation and her family's dark history in this horror graphic novel. It's a beautifully rendered graphic novel. It certainly has a lot of great character moments and deep emotional elements as it mixes this young girl digging up a lot of history in her family, and there's some really impactful horror elements and the best horror elements that really connect deeply to themes and ideas that add depth and layers to the story instead of, just being a monster for the sake of being a monster. So this one I'd highly recommend. I'm a big fan of graphic novels, so hopefully check it out. My number 8, after watching the series and sadly it being canceled, Lovecraft Country. And this is such an interesting book from Matt Ruff as it looks at 1954 Chicago, when his father goes missing. 22-year-old Army veteran Atticus Turner embarks on a road trip to New England to find him, accompanied by his Uncle George, publisher of this Safe Negro Travel Guide, and his childhood friend Letitia. And this is such an interesting idea, this book, and I really love the series too. I thought it was really cool of taking these Lovecraftian ideas, these horror elements, and reshaping them into a black-focused story, especially because, H.P. Lovecraft was pretty racist and did not see too kindly of black people, and this particular novel reshapes a lot of those horror elements, those kinds of deep occultish kinds of elements, and reshaped it into an intriguing story with a lot of layers, with a lot of history, and a lot of meaning to them, which was a really cool experience. My next one, my number 7 book that I read in 2023 is Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle. Big fan of Philip K. Dick, one of the most impressive sci-fi novelists with his books Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Total Recall, Minority Report, A Scanner Darkly, and this one in 1962. The show, I thought was pretty cool. This conceit of this idea of what if we lost World War II? And it's 1962, slavery is legal once again, the few Jews who still survive hide under assumed names in San Francisco, and you have where the United States has lost and now has been split by Nazi Germany and Japan. This is such an interesting mystery, a haunting vision, this nightmare of what could have been. And Philip K. Dick was such an incredible writer in the way that he captured these ideas that strike a specific chord with people, but really elevate on those sci-fi ideas. This alternate history is such a great idea, and I was hooked all the way up to its final moments in the book. It's less than 300 pages. It's a straightforward kind of read. It's not a big challenging read, but it's something that resonates and really makes you think about a lot of things, especially today, unfortunately. Next up, my number 6. I love books about movies. I love movies. And this is Best.Movie.Year.Ever. And this focuses on how 1999 blew up the big screen. And each chapter kind of takes a different approach to different kinds of films that were released in 1999. Obviously, you have the likes of The Matrix and the influences that it had. You have all these other kinds of films like Election and Fight Club, Office Space, Blair Witch Project, Being John Malkovich, The Sixth Sense, Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace, Eyes Wide Shut, and so many more, Magnolia. It really gives you a big, broad perspective on this very interesting year in film. It's really shows somebody, Brian Raftery, who wrote this, has such a great perspective on pop culture and film, and it's such an engaging read, and if you love film, this is a must-read for sure. My number 5 here is from one of my favorite writers, Kurt Vonnegut, and this is A Man Without a Country. And Vonnegut's definitely one of my favorite writers, had such an incredible voice in terms of portraying his ideas. And this book is more of a loose thread of different little vignettes and ideas. It's easy to burn through this book because there's not a ton on each page, and it's big fonts and ideas, but it's such a fascinating book to chew on. Vonnegut's hilariously funny and razor-sharp look at life, art, politics, himself, and the condition of the soul of America today. And just being able to look at this book, which puts a spotlight onto a particular artist with such a unique voice and engaging perspective, and really seeing inside his head and understanding his ideas just placed out there. This was such an interesting read, and if you're a Vonnegut fan, this is definitely worth a read. And even if you're not, I think this might be an interesting way to better understand him and get a better perspective. Next up is The Stand. Now, I had originally bought this on physical copy from Stephen King, and then wound up trying to do this as my first audiobook. 47 hours of this unabridged book. I'm a big Stephen King fan. Love Stephen King. If you watch my video from last year, there's definitely some Stephen King on it. I was so looking forward to checking out The Stand. Also want to check out Salem's Lot. That's really high up there on my list. This hits in a different way post-COVID. It is such an interesting and giant story of all these different characters. Goes really hard in, portraying that humanity's not the greatest. We have our hatred, we have our bad elements about ourselves, but this journey and looking at Randall Flagg, one of the best villains in all of pop culture, the Man in Black, leading this occultish kind of new world building out of this post-pandemic level world experience, and it feels so relevant today. Too many of these books feel too relevant today, and I don't like it. But this is definitely way too long, and could have, chilled out on some of, trying to listen to this audiobook, and there's a lot of slurs, and I'm just like, turn volume down. People are going to think I'm a terrible person. But in general, I think this is an epic story and certainly worth a read, especially if you're a Stephen King fan. My number 3 is The Illustrated World of Tolkien from David Day. My friend Paige bought me this, and this was honestly one of my favorite gifts that I've received in recent times. There's incredible illustrations throughout this whole entire thing, just bringing the world of Tolkien to life. And this was such an engaging read as it takes you bit by bit through all these different elements of Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and all of this history of Middle-earth. And just, honestly, looking at the art in this was purely just great. But then there's so much perspective and layers that you get. And also, just look at this cover. It also has an interesting feel to it. This is such an engaging and must-read book for anybody who loves Lord of the Rings, loves The Hobbit, loves Middle-earth. This adds so many layers, and it's such an engaging and interesting read. Now, my last two on here are both ones that I listened to. My number 2 is The Sirens of Titan, another Kurt Vonnegut story, which this one takes us with a interesting and kind of roguish kind of lead character as we navigate through this space adventure with this invasion of Earth by aliens. And it's Vonnegut. It has Vonnegut's voice. It has his biting commentary on humanity and how we deal with others. And just all these sci-fi elements all came together and made for such a great and engaging experience. And my number 1 from David Grann, The Killers of the Flower Moon. And I had to listen to this before I went to go see the film. And this is a fascinating true crime novel that adds so many layers to the story of the Osage people, to the FBI and the process that brought White and his crew down to the Osage County and trying to figure out all these murders. And it's such a horrific story. And this is so well written, so well researched, added so many layers and perspectives to this story. It was very interesting to read before going to see the film, because the film takes a very different perspective. It takes a very Scorsese perspective in terms of looking from the eyes of the despicable white man who wound up being the part of this big horrific destruction of the Osage people. But in general, it's a fascinating read and a must be told story. So do yourself a favor and go check that one out. But those are my top 10 books that I've read in 2023. I hope to have a lot more depth in terms of the books that I read in 2024. Hopefully I'll get through more, venturing off into all these different kinds of stories. But I had such a blast with some of the books that I read this year. And thank you for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.